2004, Nathan Cross took his vengeance out on 7 innocent women.
He was convicted and he was put to death. Now,
he's come back to claim his last victim.
We are talking about the movie A Wakefield Project. This is actually quite an original idea, I have to say, to a certain degree, because it's hard to define this movie in a particular category, because it actually has elements of a lot of horror genres in there. Now, this one is directed by L.A. Lopes and stars Anthony Belts, Dennis Andres, who basically is doing his best Chris Pratt impression. I've actually seen him in another film, and he was acting the same way as he is in this film. I thought, this guy hasn't got a lot of range, but he really does channel Chris Pratt. And you've also got Lindsay Seim. Now, what's this movie about? Like I said, this actually has a high amount of kind of other influences from different kind of films. So we have this small American town called Wakefield, and it's experiencing some type of kind of weird phenomena with solar flares or something like that, basically. And within a short period of time, it brings the kind of the dead back to life in various different formats. And if it's someone who's died who has unfinished business, they're going to want to take care of it. And it focuses on these two friends who have bought this kind of old inn, which has a bit of a bloody past. We have a serial killer, essentially a slasher, who had previously occupied there and has since been put to death by, execution. And of course, this phenomena brings him back, along with plenty of other kind of like possession type spirits, seemingly zombies or ghosts. There's a whole host of things, really. And obviously, our kind of trio of heroes, these two guys, and this psychic medium who they sort of run in with. What's going to happen? You have to watch the movie to find out. So, a somewhat of an intriguing premise. I mean, like I said, it's not overly original necessarily, but it has so many elements from different genres. You mix them all together, and you have a sort of a fairly unique story, which is kind of a mishmash of, just kind of like the town going mad, like the crazies, things like that, zombies, possession, slashers, haunted house. There's loads of kind of like things thrown into the mix here to make some type of cocktail of horror. And I've got to say, because it has so many elements, it does give it a somewhat of a unique feel, although maybe these individual elements are relatively kind of run-of-the-mill, if that makes sense. So it's an interesting premise, and you don't really know where the movie's going to go there, and because there's so many elements here, our antagonist, these ghostly beings, spirits, things like that. Sometimes they're zombies. You don't really know what they're going to do, what they're going to be capable of, because there's a line in the movie that suggests that different kind of spirits can come back in different ways. Some will be corporeal, some won't be. Some will be purely a invisible force, things like that. We have elements where we see people kind of like with kind of weird veins on their neck, which suggests that they are being possessed and things like this, whilst this slasher is full-on kind of corporeal slasher mode. So yeah, there's quite a lot of fun elements in this movie, and I got to say, I enjoyed our cast. As I mentioned, one of our cast is just channeling Chris Pratt, and I've seen him in another movie called Defective, and again, he was the same sort of character, but yeah, okay, he's obviously got a one-trick pony thing, but it works in the context of this movie and made him quite a kind of a likeable character. And if you ever wondered what Chris Pratt would be in a low-budget horror movie, then here's your answer. But I just quite enjoyed our three leads here. I thought they did a pretty good job. I think the elements work fairly well together. You could maybe say it's a little bit confusing about what's going on, but I got to say, I thought the central intrigue here was quite good, and then the setup was an interesting sort of setup, and the production value feels reasonably high in regards to things like lighting, camera placement, that sort of thing, location shooting, lots of different kind of angles. So, despite the fact this is a relatively low-budget film, it does have a sort of like a professionally made feel to it, so you're not feeling you're kind of watching too much of an amateur product. So yeah, I quite enjoyed the fact that it feels fairly slick. Things like the kind of the makeup effects I feel are relatively subtle, but I think it works for this movie. It's not kind of overdone. You're not looking at silly effects and things like that. There are a couple of occasions where I feel it does look kind of creepy. These kind of possessed sort of souls just kind of seemingly hanging around and things like that. I thought worked quite well. I've got to say, for me, the one thing that maybe it didn't work quite as well was this actual slasher angle. Now, I'm not the biggest slasher fan, so I'll put that out there to begin with, but to me, it just kind of was a little bit on the sillier side. I mean, the guy that they've picked is like this massive guy. It looks like he should have been in the WWF. I just don't know. It looks a little bit on the nose, whilst I feel some of the other movie elements were a little bit more subtle. But this guy's just like, oh, we have this huge jacked guy who's like a serial killer. And it just happens to have lived in this house, and he just happens to have a kind of a personal connection to someone involved here on this particular night. And it just, to me, that was the one element that just felt a little bit forced. Whilst had it not had that, because to be honest with you, the threat is still palpable even without the slasher guy. I thought it actually would have been a bit more of a cerebral film, but for me, the slasher element just dumbed the film down a little bit. I've got to say, I thought the ending was a little weak as well. To me, it ended on a little bit of a whimper and kind of undone, without obviously spoiling anything here for the film. Just kind of, although it wasn't terrible, but it kind of undone, I think, a lot of the goodwill that I had for this movie whilst watching it. Overall, I've got to say, this was a fairly enjoyable film with a likeable cast, an interesting premise, and, you know, it was a well-made film. Few niggles here and there, but I've got to say, for the most part, I actually enjoyed this one a fair amount. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.